Hello and welcome back. Our next guest is Charlotte Crosswell, the CEO of Innovate Finance. And before that, worked at the London Stock Exchange and NASDAQ before turning her hand to the world of FinTech. Hello, Charlotte. How are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm all good, thank you. All good. Getting used to my lounge.
As we all are, we all are. First of all, I've been asking all the speakers today what their advice is for entrepreneurs and business leaders at this time. Obviously, given your membership and the businesses you've worked in previously, what would your advice be to CEOs, to entrepreneurs out there right now?
It's really challenging when you go through something like COVID-19. It's so different to 2008. I sort of feel that was the Warm Up Act. I think there's half of the entrepreneurs attempt to say, "My goodness, the opportunity is so significant now. Let's just continue to expand." And then half are being held back by having to conserve cash and working through when your next funding round is coming through. So I think it obviously depends on where you are on the investment cycle to what opportunities you have and what you can take advantage of. It is quite clear that it's going to be a long slog of a recovery. There are some that will be incredibly fortunate because they've just closed a round and have funding and can take advantage of some of those opportunities. And there's others that are going to have to be more cautious and potentially roll back on some of their product launches or overseas expansion, etc. So you very much got to take into consideration where you are in that cycle as to how you took advantage of it. The one piece of advice that I think we all have to consider is don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to sit there and change. And an overseas market, for example, that's always been attractive before may not be the one you now look at. There may be an opportunity comes up that you've never seen before. There may be a product that you deprioritize that now actually you can recognize is going to be the one there. So I think it's been brave enough to make that pivot, and we've already started to see this through COVID-19. But you have got to conserve cash. It is going to be a long road to recovery. And some will take advantage of that and will fly, and others are going to have to sit there and hunker down and be cautious until we come out.
And given Innovate Finance's membership spans the whole gamut of FinTech, can you tell us a bit about the immediate impact that your members have seen from coronavirus?
Well, as you say, it does cover the whole piece, and membership actually goes from the largest US investment bank all the way through to an early stage startup to big tech as well, and consultancies and professional services, and and the wider piece as well, asset management. So I think our challenge we have, of course, is sitting there and looking at how everyone reacts. And so there are some that are incredibly busy, and AML, RegTech is really flying, and as we can see, that's those are already seeing the positive impact on their business of this. There's others who are coming through digital transformation and are going to play an incredibly important role. We're already seeing partnerships coming through where big financial institutions are accelerating their transformation and already in touch with them. Others who need to have FinTech through this journey to help them. So whether that's just KYB, due diligence activity, all the way through to how do we lend out to SMEs. So the partnership opportunities are definitely coming through already. So that initial month of everyone sitting there focusing on the business in hand, the last month has definitely been a pick up in activity on that, and we're seeing a lot of our members come together, either FinTech to FinTech, FinTech to financial institution, or even some of the larger institutions themselves talking to facilitating those conversations as well. So there are certainly huge opportunities for the sector coming through. We've been particularly active in the non-bank lending sector. Because of obviously the government schemes that were produced, the CBIL schemes and the bounce back loan schemes, or BIBLs as people like to call them. Those we've had non-bank lenders who have been very interested in servicing their existing customers and have wanted to participate in those, but they weren't accredited lenders at the British Business Bank, and they've had to go through that process, and again have had to react extremely quickly while managing investment rounds, while managing their own forbearance requests coming in from the SMEs, and also, the wholesale funding on the other side where they're not able to get forbearance requests actioned. So, so certainly that from a policy perspective, that's where we have been spending a lot of time, and, we're really pleased to see that there are some now being accredited, and increasing amounts of non-bank lenders being accredited and processing some of those, much needed government loans. And I think, the fintechs are so keen to be involved in those early weeks because they recognise that their speed, their ability to onboard new customers, their distribution, their online checks could really play a really significant role in that. And we've been doing our part, in supporting that and having the conversations between regulators and policymakers.
It's interesting, the partnership piece you mentioned. We saw Starling Bank and Funding Circle just this morning, coming together, not natural sort of partners, but obviously in a time of crisis, they're working together. Just to our audience, if you've got any questions for Charlotte, please don't forget to put them in the chat window on the right-hand side, and we'll get to them in a moment. Charlotte, what in terms of the long-term impact of what we're seeing now? There's consolidation. I've asked all of our speakers today about consolidation, acquisitions, mergers. Do you anticipate the fallout of coronavirus to include a consolidation across certain parts of fintech?
I was very involved in tech back in the 90s, and and it just seems that was, again, another warm-up act that we were getting ready for. And what we saw is obviously this huge fragmentation and niche products coming through, and us trying to work out which browser you were going to use and which search engine you were going to use, because nobody really knew back then. And eventually, during a period of fragmentation, you inevitably see a period of consolidation. So that's very natural. And you also know there's market corrections, and a lot of people knew that there was going to be a market correction. We just weren't expecting this one. So if you look at the cycle we've seen in the past, you've got to therefore assume the consolidation was coming anyway. Is this going to accelerate? Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it. Is it going to accelerate some partnership opportunities from fintech to fintech? Yes, I believe it will. And you already pointed out one of those that potentially wouldn't necessarily happen. Maybe it would have happened in the end. It probably has been accelerated through this process. So it may not, it may be collaboration, it may be partnerships, it may be consolidation, and it may be the go-it-alone strategy as well, because suddenly your size of opportunity has just gone up and escalated. But like the Chancellor says, when you listen to him, he said not every SME is going to survive, and unfortunately not every fintech company is going to survive. That may have been something that was going to happen anyway. Others. Not every startup, unfortunately, is always successful, and others just have repeated success. And you just had Charlie on the on the screen, just sitting there, who just seems to just come back and have another success each time. But so we will see consolidation. Some of those will be as a result of this crisis, or some of those will have been accelerated because of this crisis. And but the one thing we can see is that there is an opportunity there as well.
I'm about to ask you this question, but people are asking it in the chat as well, which is on the government response to coronavirus. We've spoken a few times in the last few weeks about the pros and cons. How would you rate the government response overall to the coronavirus crisis and their support of the fintech industry?
And I think if we look at the decade of innovation we have seen coming out of the 2008 crisis, and the gap in the market that was created on the back of that, and a lot of that was around SME financing. We've seen an incredible amount of alternative finance providers appear on the back of that. And I think we have been disappointed that we haven't been able to utilize some of those solutions as much over the last few weeks, which just shows you that you can go through this period of innovation, but actually it's taking time to embed. And I would say in the last 12 months, we've really started to see that embedding into every part of finance, but maybe not quite in time to be seen as critical. And so for every fintech that we work with, when you look over 3 or 4, just incredible reach, incredible opportunities, customer base is huge, but maybe not, obviously as big as the reach of a bank. The problem we have, particularly in SME financing, is that the coverage of current accounts obviously still sits at the high street. The coverage of loans is very fragmented now, and it's up to a third of loans come through alternative lenders. So that's been the challenge, but then that's our role as well, is to take maybe the I think we're working with up to 40 now on non-bank lenders, is taking that consolidated view and saying, actually, collectively, this is a really, really significant group. And in terms of loans made last year, it's really impressive, the numbers coming through. And how do we make sure that they're taken into consideration? The problem on the business interruption loan particularly is it was decided to get as quick a scheme as possible up and running in that first 10 days, which you look back on it was actually quite impressive. We did manage to get something running so quickly, but they used an existing scheme that came out of 2008 where we didn't have alternative lenders in place. And so what we've constantly pushed is not look back at what has been done, but constantly sit there and try to push forward for the next evolution. And we are, as I said, we are seeing now lenders being accredited, then bounce backs come along, and we look at how we can get cost of capital to the point where, the non-bank lenders can come in. And really, we want to use the speed, the deployment, the volume, and this distribution mechanism. And, and I know, ourselves, the regulators, the bank, the treasury officials, have been inundated by, people saying, look, here's a different way of looking at it. There has definitely been a bandwidth issue of being able to consider new ideas. So as we are now in this next phase where we've actually got money now going to, getting to the SMEs who so desperately need it, we have got to continue to push ourselves and say, well, we still have a segment that's not as active as they believe they can be, and we believe they can be, and where they would like to be. So we've got to continue to push forward and not necessarily look back. There's no point looking back. It's just, let's keep pushing it forward. And we are, as you know, very active in this space and have been the whole way through, and will continue to be so until we find a solution that works for all parties.
So we're running a poll at the moment asking whether European governments should be doing more to protect fintech. If you were going to vote in that poll, where would you come down?
Should they be? Yes, absolutely. Because also we don't want to lose. It's what people forget. We don't want to lose this decade of innovation. It would be awful to go back to where we were in 2009 and have to go through the whole process again. So what I've been saying, obviously, to MPs, ministers, and officials, is let's make sure as we come out of this crisis. So let's take if 2021 as the 2009. We now have a fintech sector that's ready to go. So 2020 is not only to be leveraging it and using it, but it is absolutely there to protect it. We saw other markets were very active in the early days. So Australia came out very much in favour of their sector. France came out with this very big fund there. Collectively, when we look at the different government schemes, between the CBILS loans, the bounce back loans, the furlough, the self-employment that's coming through now we're waiting for the future fund to go live, Innovate loans and grants. There's a lot out there. A lot of the time, the fintech sector particularly has been left out of quite a lot of those. They can't apply for the business interruption loan because you have to show profitability. And in many cases, they're still in growth phase. Bounce back loan, isn't really enough money for them to be sitting there funding staff, etc. And a lot of them are regulated businesses, so their staffing levels have to be high because of compliance. And so therefore we turn to equity. And what's the role of equity here? And is that the Future Fund and the Innovate UK grants? But what are we still missing? So every time we see these new schemes come through, we only obviously are feeding into those, but we're also saying we're still missing a piece. And I still think fintech, we have to look at those that are VC backed and are being supported, in most cases by VCs protecting their portfolios, but who's not VC backed, who needs investment, and that is going to be that that creator of jobs over the coming years. And let's make sure we protect that, particularly in the areas where we're going to really need that choice and competition. So whether that's financing, affordable credit, loans, how to get businesses kick-started. We really have to make sure we protect that, and that's the thing that I don't think most countries want, is to lose companies directly on the back of this. That it's the ones that were doing extremely well and were in growth phase. Let's make sure we're supporting them. And what's the role of government departments, the private sector, the public sector, etc., to support them over the coming weeks and months. And I still think we have work to be done there. So what we're doing is constantly just looking at what else is needed. So there's rarely a day goes by where probably Treasury don't hear from me saying we need to do more, we have to protect this sector. And everyone recognises that the fintech sector has had huge success in the UK. So we now have to really push hard to make sure we are supporting it.
And especially as you've sort of pointed out, areas like lending, which are important now, but also in the recovery phase when businesses need to borrow and fintechs need to borrow as well, will be even more important. Across your membership, you touched on it earlier, but across your membership, in terms of the breakout financial technologies of this crisis, those are being pushed into the limelight. Who is benefiting because of the new focus on these technologies?
I think so certainly who's benefiting at the moment is RegTech. That's what we're really seeing. Obviously, those technologies already being deployed. Anyone who's helping digital transformation, we're already seeing, as I said, those partnerships coming through. So while some of the banks had obviously, been quite well versed in their digital transformation, we've already seen a lot of banks in the UK, particularly, engaged in transformation. Other markets, maybe not so much. They're accelerating. In other sectors, asset management, wealth management, insurance, we've only really started that journey quite recently. A lot of them have looked to fintech, to lessons that have been learned, and I think that's going to really increase in activity. Every single financial institution is talking about how they're accelerating their transformation. So the B2B solutions are definitely going to be expedited, in my view. And I haven't found a large financial institution yet who have said to me, no, we're not investing now. We're going to continue to push through, because we don't know how long this crisis will go on for. This is a matter of 3 months. We'll get through the crisis and then we'll go back to old ways. Everyone recognises that we are probably going to be making significant changes, and this could be for some time. But people are becoming a lot more digitally aware. What's going to be the impact on pensions? What's going to be the impact on savings? How much your inheritance maybe that you're trying to manage. And now people go, well, I can't go and see someone. I need to have that digitally. It's just incredible, really, some of the innovation you're seeing, and just some of the elderly who've had to finally get to grips with not being able to physically go to a bank, and have had to sit there and say, well, I need to do this digitally, and are then turning to the fintech sector for some of that, because they just they've got more intuitive apps that they can use on their phone. And there's just I love some of the stories you're hearing of people sort of sitting there finally doing online banking for the first ever time, and needing to have more information because they just don't have a branch to go into, and they thought they would never have to change, and suddenly they are changing. So there's some of the challenger banks, we're going to continue to see that opportunity for them to grow their customer base.
Well, we've got Romy from PensionBee coming on tomorrow, so we'll definitely be asking her about long-term savings, pensions. We've got Nutmeg coming up next as well. There are some questions from the audience I just want to cut to. There's a question from Asit, who's asked, do you have any advice for first-time entrepreneurs raising funds, particularly at the moment? Obviously a very difficult time. What's your sort of advice broadly to entrepreneurs at the moment?
I think the thing I've been really encouraged by is just how many VCs out there, large family offices, are willing to give free advice at the moment. And that's not even for potential portfolio companies. They're giving up their time, saying we will sit there and help people go through this. So go and definitely take any advice you can get. Go and have the conversations. And this is where the angel investor network is quite significant. Obviously, a lot of the time, if you're raising for the first time, you're not going down to VC routes anyway. And certainly, a lot of the VCs are only focusing on their own portfolio companies who are needing additional funds. But there is really good advice out there. Said you have got to have that story of how you're managing your cash and what you're going to do to respond. We've seen very large fintechs furlough staff and put product expansion on hold. And you're probably going to have to pivot, but be aware of that and be bold and get ask for the help and take the advice. I would say.
There's a question from Titania, who's asking about, obviously you're doing some great work lobbying government, trying to get more support for fintech. Her question is, what can we do? What can the audience, the industry do to encourage the government to engage in the sector, to I guess encourage more support of the sector? And
I think what's always helpful is to have the underlying data around it. So we can go and have lots of conversations. Sorry, it's one of my endless Amazon deliveries. So we can go and have lots of conversations, and we're doing that, and we're collating as much as we can. I think having one-to-one conversations is great, and and Treasury have they have had some significant amounts of conversations with people, but what they also need is to have that data to back it up, is to look at that. So if you're sitting there and suddenly you were going to raise X amount and now you can't, get that data either through us or directly over, to show the impact of this. And I think it's really important that we constantly look at the impact that this crisis is having, both positive and negative, and we feed that in. I think certainly in terms of the funding element, that's something we're trying to collate all the time. We're trying to sit there and look at the runway of cash, and then when are people next going to raise, and is there opportunities for them to leverage DIT, for example, on trade missions, where the opportunities are. So certainly, I was told recently I was agitating. I'm not sure necessarily that was a compliment, but I took it as one. But I would say if the audience continue to agitate, it's a sector that has had incredible support and talk about, and we have to make sure that we are keeping it really up at that level all the time to show what the sector can do. And that's really important that people remember that, and we don't just go back into our old world of 2008 and deal with this crisis in the same way we did then, because there's some tremendous solutions there. You look at open banking and what that opportunity can have, and the impact that's going to have through this crisis, where everyone was sitting there saying, where does that go next? And now I have more conversations on open banking every day than I probably would have in a week before. So let's push ourselves forward, and let's really let's go and tell everyone what we can do, and some of the really good news stories, but also some of the challenges we're facing.
I like that advice of agitate. I think that's a good one to hang on to. Alexi has asked, is there any visibility into a potential non-bank lender focused solution to be introduced by the government? Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, it's I think I wake up sort of talking about non-bank lending and civils and bibbles, and and even my 11-year-old now knows what every single one stands for, which I'm not saying necessarily is what she needs to know in her schooling. I think there's definitely bandwidth now to look at it. We have been on daily conversations through the whole process. I think until the money started flowing through bounce back loans, it was quite difficult to really shout loud enough and to get that voice heard. And as I said, there's lots of nice conversations go on. But what I'm now looking at is what's the plan, and or otherwise, at worst case, what's the plan for the plan? So I need to understand what's coming next, because we need to tell our members, and they need to be able to tell their own VCs or their wholesale funders. That we are seeing more and more CBILS accredited lenders coming through at the British Business Bank. There's always a lag between being accredited and actually starting to do the loans, and I think people need to understand that. And that's because you have to get your legal agreements finalised, your operational processes finalised, because you can only do that once you have your accreditation. And so people have been getting frustrated, sort of, why they're not lending the day they get the announcement. It's because it actually takes still another couple of weeks on top of that announcement. So I'm encouraged by the fact we are starting to see a wider set of distribution. I'm encouraged by partnership conversations coming through. But we still need to look at how we support the sector in terms of cost of capital. Where are they going to get the funds from, particularly in bounce back? Because obviously access to that low cost of capital is incredibly difficult for the sector. And I continue to talk to policymakers about what does it look like? What's the is there an impact of lessening of choice, for example, coming through? So imagine a new business wants to start next year, and it's seen an opportunity out of this crisis, and they want to get funding. Where are they going to go to? So I'm also spending time looking at the future role of finance, particularly in SME financing, for FinTech, for other sectors as well. And what does the role of FinTech have? And I think that's where people get very engaged on that from policy, is making sure that we don't. Last thing we want is to reduce down competition on the back of this. And so we have to show what that scope can do. But it has been a challenge. It's been a lot of work by a lot of fintechs, and we really appreciate all the support we've had on doing that. And hopefully we will start to see some action soon. But I just love the stats of where we're starting to see the loans now being distributed by the sector, and that's going to really help as well. So fingers crossed.
One more question on the policy point of view. What do you think? It feels like the sort of ministers in various departments have had sort of hot and cold relationships with the fintech sector over the last few years. What do you think the current view of the sector is? Obviously, there's a crisis, but do you think the Treasury was very supportive? Under the previous Chancellor. What direction do you think that's going in? Do you think the new government is broadly sort of on board with the direction?
I mean, certainly I've had those conversations, and they are on board, or they were before this crisis. As I said, has it been in the forefront of their mind over the last couple of months? More challenging, I would say, on that. We have to remember that under the budget, in the budget this year, and a lot of it was dominating the speech on coronavirus, but actually there was a FinTech strategic review announced in that budget. Now that delay's that's been slightly delayed, obviously, to make sure the right people around the table to do that. But that's going to be a really fascinating review, because we're not just going to look at where's FinTech going to next. We're going to actually have almost the advantage of what have we done with FinTech through this crisis? Did we leverage it as much as we could have? And therefore what happens next? So as I said, FinTech got born out of the last financial crisis, and now it's going to play a major role as we come out of this one, because it's already going. So, I'm optimistic that strategic review is actually going to come at a critical time as we come out of this, look at what's been done and what we could have done better, maybe. But then most importantly, what do we do with the sector going forward? But you look at DIT, and I was speaking to them yesterday, incredibly supportive of companies who want to export at the moment and need help in landing in markets. That activity is still going on. It's happening virtually, saves us all getting on a plane. But and they've urged people to reach out to them and say, if they need help in market, that obviously that those conversations are continuing all the time. Prosperity Fund is definitely coming through with new opportunities, and there may be markets through that will throw up new opportunities that we wouldn't have looked at all. So so there are opportunities coming through. There is support there. I know that a lot of the sector has been disappointed over the last couple of months by the fact it hasn't been as front foremost as we would have liked. I feel that those conversations are accelerating, and certainly when I was doing a conversation recently with one of the ministers, FinTech came up in the opening speech, so we seem to be coming back up again. And certainly we're certainly doing our best to Innovate Finance to make sure that we'll continue to keep it at the front and foremost of the next few weeks.
Good, excellent. Very last question from me before we wrap up. What do you think the lasting impact of coronavirus will be on FinTech? When we look back in a few years' time, what do you think is going to be? What will we remember? What will have changed because of this experience?
I mean, apart from the obvious, the flexible ways of working, and I think people are going to change that quite permanently. The FinTech sector adapted so quickly to the new way of working. When everyone had to adapt, but it was totally seamless. It just wasn't an issue at all. So that gets me interesting, just how we move around. And I've talked a lot about investment. We've all often said that FinTechs often have to move to London, or at least show they have a headquarters in London, even if it's only a small office, to be able to get that investment from VCs. Well, now your VC can be at the end of the road and you still can't go to see them. So, is that going to open up opportunities for people to be based maybe outside of London and attract investment there? I think, in terms of, the impact, as I said, it comes back to the review. Coming out of this crisis, everyone is going to look to innovation and transformation. And there are going to be tremendous opportunities, to leverage what we have out there. Overseas markets are already approaching us, saying, we're accelerating our own transformation. We're looking to the UK for products and services and thought leadership on that as well. So, as I said, born at the last sector, I think this is the crisis that will show that it's not optional next time, but actually, we are going to see a tremendous amount of buy-in to what's been done. That doesn't necessarily mean, unfortunately, not every company is going to survive this, but it will solidify sort of why the sector is here and what it's going to do.
Excellent. Charlotte, thank you so much, and thank our audience for their questions as well.